I finally did it, and it only took opening a bike shop to do it. I built up the Traction GRRIT frame that they sent me, and in this video, I'm gonna talk about it. So I just came from a ride and... how's my hair? Still generally bad. I honestly wish I didn't wait so long to build up the GRRIT. In my previous video about the GRRIT, I mentioned that it's possibly like a touring frame, but I'm thinking it's not right now. I won't be using it as a tourer, but it seems to be the exact type of frame that fits most of my riding. Here's what my riding looks like. Got lost. Hello. Nara na ilusutanan?
Oo na.
Okay, thank you. You can get any more in a road than this. Still lost. The Traction GRRIT is an aluminum frame with a tapered head tube, through axles, flat mount for the brakes, and lots of eyelets. The weight of the frame is 1,843 grams and the fork is 874 grams. A few disclaimers about the Traction GRRIT that I am using. Look, we sell the Traction GRRIT here in the Villain Cycles bike shop, so this is not going to be an unbiased review. But there is a reason why I decided to stock these bikes at the store. I'll get to that later on in the video. In the meantime, let me take a quick second to thank the sponsor of this video, Curve Coffee Collaborators. Curve has actually become a big part of this shop. In the future, if the shop does well, my vision for this space is to one day also have like a coffee bar at the shop, so people can just hang out and have coffee at the same time, lounge in the culture that is cycling. But since I didn't want to complicate my life with opening a bike shop and a coffee shop at the same time, I decided the next best thing would be to serve cold brew coffee, and then I used Curve Coffee Collaborator beans as well as the Toddy cold brew system, both of which you can get at the curve.coffee website. It's a really easy way to serve coffee in your small business. Take it from me. I think I've sold like 100+ bottles already in the first month, so we're doing pretty good. If you check out curve.coffee, you can get a lot of the things you need for a cafe. In the future, I'll need like an espresso machine, a grinder, a lot more coffee beans, a skilled barista. Thank you, Curve, for sponsoring the vlog. Okay, back to the disclaimers for the bike. The GRRIT that I am riding is not exactly the same as the stock Traction GRRIT. There are a few differences because, again, as mentioned, this was sent to me as frame only about a year ago. The wheels were built by Kenneth here in the store. We used these rims. Helix SL rims, and then some stainless steel spokes as well as the traction hub. The stock does not have these wheels. And the tires that we're using are Maxxis Rambler 700x40. I think when you buy a new bike, the first thing you'll probably want to upgrade will be the tires. Usually the tires that they put on stock bikes are not very good. And then of course, like the other components like the handlebars, the bar tape, the saddle, they're all different. They're not from the stock Traction GRRIT. What is similar to the stock Traction GRRIT though is that I also put a micro shift advent X group set on it. Although the crank is different. I have a 32, which I kind of regret. I wish I got a bigger crank. On the stock, I believe it comes with a 40 and then 1148 in the back. Also, another difference between my grit and a stock Traction GRRIT is that my grit has nut brakes. I think they're double piston mechanical brakes. And then the stock is just a single piston. I'll get to that more later on in the video. So the main reason I decided to finally build up the bike is, well, first of all, having a new bike is always fun. And second, when we opened the shop, I knew that I wanted to have traction bikes in the shop. But I didn't want to sell the bikes if I didn't try it for myself. I've ridden a traction bike before, but I wanted something that I could show people that, yes, I ride this bike. And let me tell you, it rides. Out on the road, this isn't the most exciting thing to ride. So compared to my other two bikes feel twitchy and fast on the road. But the downside to those other two bikes is that whenever things start to get technical or really loose, or like an off-road, uphill or downhill, those two other bikes were a bit more difficult to control. This one, on the other hand, comes alive once you reach some off-road because it's just a lot easier to maneuver. So that's one of the things that I really like about the bike actually, because at that price range, I feel like a lot of beginner cyclists would be buying this bike, and the handling would be so much easier than if you buy like a race bike. You know, like a race gravel bike or a race road bike. Those tend to be squiggly. This tends to be much more predictable in terms of handling. Also for me, for the size medium, I don't have any toe overlap, which is an issue on my other bikes. And toe overlap makes riding off-road just a little bit tricky, especially if you're going up a steep hill and your front is moving left and right, left and right. And considering that most of my riding consists of crappy inner roads with fire roads mixed in, I feel like this bike fits the bill perfectly. I'm so tempted to keep it, really. I mean, we're selling it in the shop, but I am so tempted to keep it as my personal bike and upgrade some of the stuff that I feel like is making this bike not shine as much as it should. So what would I upgrade? First of all, this is going to be a very unfair comparison because the two other bikes that I ride are easily 3 to 4 times the price of the Traction GRRIT. It's a little bit unfair, but here goes. Most bikes at this price range have the same challenge. The mechanical brakes are not great. So in fact, I think that most people, once they have an entry-level bike, they start riding it for a few months, and then I feel like that is the first thing they will want to upgrade. To be fair, mechanical brakes are fine, but I'm so used to hydraulic brakes that when I'm going downhill, I find myself pulling the brakes much earlier than normal because I know that the mechanical disc brakes are not as responsive as hydraulic disc brakes. And the other thing with mechanical disc brakes is that once the brake pads start to thin, you're going to need to adjust it every now and then. It's pretty simple. Here's Kenneth doing it on the Traction GRRIT.
To adjust the brake caliper, loosen the cable.
Okay.
The calipers. Then,
so you loosen the caliper.
Yes. Then you're gonna adjust the brake pads on the right side.
So you tighten it.
Yes. To make sure the the caliper is center here. Squeeze this.
Squeeze it so the brakes close, and then that means it's aligned.
Tighten, yes.
Then you tighten.
Tighten the caliper. Then tighten the cable.
Then tighten the cable. You tighten the cable last?
Yes. Not so tight. You make sure there's space there, the left side. So that's it.
So again, the very first thing that you might want to upgrade would be like a good pair of tires, but then also get better brakes. Now, you have a couple of options for better brakes. The expensive option would just be to buy the Shimano GRX or the SRAM equivalent. They come with hydraulic brakes, wide gearing. The Shimano GRX is super popularly known as the gravel group set, and it's hydraulic brakes. It works great, but it is probably the same price as the bike at around 30 to 40,000 pesos. So for a lot of people, upgrading to a Shimano GRX is not going to make a lot of sense. You can also opt for cable actuated hydraulic brakes, or as some people like to call them, like mechanical hydraulic, which is basically, it still uses a cable actuated brake, but there is a hydraulic chamber in the actual caliper itself. I'm not a smart person. I don't really know how it works, but it bites similarly to a hydraulic brake. So it is, from what I have seen on YouTube, very effective. There are many online. I think the most popular ones are Juntech. But also Traction offers cable actuated hydraulic disc brakes. It's a quad piston. That means there are 4 pistons grabbing onto the rotor. So I'm thinking of possibly ordering one for the bike just to see how big an improvement it would be. It looks kind of familiar, right? I think it's going to perform pretty well. The last option after researching online also would be the L2 GRT. This is actually a pretty good option. The L2 GRT is a 1x12 group set, mechanical group set, but hydraulic brakes, and not too expensive compared to Shimano GRX. Although you will need to get a new cassette as well, because the microshift is 10 speed and then the L2 GRT will be a 12 speed. Not as expensive, but getting close to Shimano GRX territory. So that's the biggest thing I would change. But even then, I still think it's a great buy. It has a good price range for a lot of cyclists who are new to cycling. And also, the geometry is very beginner friendly. So I knew that coming in. Beginner friendly, a little bit more upright. It means you don't have to bend your back as much. And then also the trail figure tends to be a little bit forward. So it's not like a race bike. But here's where I was surprised. I was surprised that I would enjoy it so much on most of my riding, on the type of riding that I do, which is like inner roads, crappy back roads, fire roads, steep uphills and steep downhills. And the Traction GRRIT performs in that environment really, really well. Considering that it's not too heavy, the geometry is generally quite relaxed. And then on the downhill, the higher travel, I think that's the word, the higher travel makes it so much easier to handle, especially when going down off-road descents. And then of course the frame can easily fit a 700x40 and still has a lot of space. I'm not sure what's the widest tire you can fit there, but I want to say you could probably get a 50 in there. Although 50 would be cutting it pretty thin. So yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised by how much I enjoy riding this frame. So the question now is, do I still continue to keep it as a shop bike or just keep it as a bike for myself? I don't know. Shout out to Jonathan and Sep for sending in some of the parts a year ago. Sorry it took so long, guys, but we finally built it. Stay tuned, more videos soon. I'm walking down to put the camera and I almost feel like I shouldn't have seen the terrain before deciding on that downhill. Seems sketchy.